And this month, I want to talk about the famous Lassonde curve and get Rob's input onto that as well. Many people would be familiar with this moving through the life cycle or the hoped for life cycle of a typical resources stock from exploration through discovery, through hopefully making that discovery bigger and better through drilling. And that's that first peak there you see through time. And then companies may typically hit this valley of death, which is a pretty bad term, but the orphan period where they need to grapple with three things: work on feasibility, working on finance, and working on permitting. And those things are not generally as exciting as making the initial discovery, and often the share price will drift down before hopefully the company moves through into into project development and production and get into cash flow. But what I think we're seeing now, and we have heard the word boom in the last few weeks, the market has turned on a sixpence, and we're certainly seeing a lot better valuations being attracted by parts of the market. And I think the shape of the Lassonde curve actually may be changing somewhat, and it may be flattening out, particularly that valley of death period may not be, in some cases, quite as steep and nasty as has been over the past probably 5 years. It's probably been 4 or 5 years of very tough times for the junior resources sector as a general rule. So I've stolen this slide from my friend Paul Bennett at Medallion Metals. It just shows the change in market caps of a number of WA gold developers over the last 18 odd months. You can see Black Cat and Nika Metal, Brightstar, Medallion, and Astral Resources there. And you can see some of them, have had at least 10 bagger change in market caps. That's not all just change in share price because, most of these companies have raised reasonable licks of cash to augment the size of their market cap. But these companies are all typically in that valley of death zone in the Lassonde curve. And you can see that their valuations have changed significantly. So going from situations where their market cap in general was substantially less than the capital that they needed to raise to get into production. In many cases, their market caps now is substantially more than the capital that they need to raise to get into production. And that's a really virtuous circle or spiral that the market will then believe that they've got much better chance of getting into production and their share price will go even higher. This is another way of looking at it just quickly, data from Austex. You can see, if you look at the last 12 months, this is market caps broken up by quartile. You can see over the last 12 months that the largest companies, which are generally the producers, have done the best, and the smallest companies have done the worst. But if you look at the last month or the last 3 months, the small companies are actually catching up. That sort of reflects perhaps that real bottom end of the Lassonde curve moving up slightly. But it also, to me, shows that, there's still quite a bit of potential value to be had in looking at the explorers. And we're going to hear about a couple from Rob. But Rob, maybe just to throw a question at you in respect of Musgrave and the Lassonde curve. Musgrave Minerals got taken over while it was in that pre-production phase. But you've done a lot of work in that feasibility, permitting stage of things, which doesn't attract the market. How do you see that Lassonde curve, from your experience at Musgrave?
John, it's a good question. I think it's about news flow. So if you can continue that news flow, I'm an explorationist, so I love discovery. I love being out there drilling the holes. And so I think if we can continue as a company to try and keep the market excited while we're doing the mundane work that we need to do to de-risk projects, so to keep a little bit of exploration going during that period. It's
Yeah.
sometimes difficult. It's a bit easier in the market today because there's more capital available, but in a really tight market, that is very difficult to do because every single cent is really important for the development process. So it's a little bit easier now. The other thing I think we're seeing, I agree with you that that valley of death has come up. It's still a bit of a flat spot, but there's probably more chance in the current boom that there's more M&A activity in that time because the larger corporates also know that it's difficult for those in the development space to actually get significant share price movement. So they're sort of stuck.
Mm.
The biggest companies can take a bit of a ping at that in that space at that time.
Yeah, interesting. You've got to sort of, with one hand, show the market that you're still exploring, and almost surreptitiously keep on with the more boring stuff.
Correct.
Where does a company like Ramelius fit into this equation? I guess that's referring to the Lassonde curve. There's a few parts to this. Where do you see the gold prices in 1 to 2 years? I'm going to give that to you, Rob. And do you feel there's a discrepancy between the gold price and junior miners slash explorers like Astral and MI6, for example? Take your pick of any of those questions. I might try and chip in as well. Yep.
Yeah. I guess I'll start with the gold price. The fundamentals for gold are really strong. And John is probably way across the fundamentals a lot more than I am. But really, interest rates, you're talking about commodity shifts, you're talking about instability within global markets, you're talking about debt. But we're also talking about Donald Trump. Mr. Trump likes to be a bit of a disruptor, so that is generally good for gold. So in that space, I can't see gold, dropping back to the levels it was over 12 months ago. Gold always sort of fluctuates a little bit. We've had a really strong run in the last probably 2 months, but who knows what the upside could be. But commodities are cyclical. At some point, it will come back, but I think we've got a pretty strong run ahead of us in the shorter term.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think, Trump, his policies seem to be driving inflation up and wanting to bring interest rates down. And with those two sort of countervailing forces, that's very good for gold. And on top of that, you've got central bank buying or, de-dollarization from central banks like the Chinese central bank. And that's also been underpinning the gold price. And I don't see that fundamental driver disappearing in the near term either. So it does look very positive. Just on the other part of that question, I'll talk about Astral because that's in the low oil portfolio. The share price has moved up reasonably nicely, probably trading at around a $300 million market cap. But if you put in a gold price to their pre-feasibility study, which is below today's Aussie dollar gold price, you can get a NPV of 1.5 billion. So it's still trading at 20% or less of its underlying NPV. So yeah, I think there is some very good potential as it does move through, hopefully to development for that value gap to close. And Rob, you mentioned M&A. That's probably one of the companies that people talk about reasonably frequently as being in the sights of the M&A targets. And then a question from Robbie Joseph. This is a good one. If you were to have an educated guess, of course, how many ounces of gold do you see in the Cue province that remain undiscovered?
And good question, Robbie. Total province. What time frame are we talking about? Are we talking about? I mean, there's been 130 years of mining there to date, and there's probably been, somewhere around that 20 to 30 million ounces. You could probably double that. So, but depends how long you want to wait, Rob. So you might, does it take 100 years to do that, or does it take 20? So, but there's a lot more to be discovered, and I think dollars in the ground.
Yeah. And just following up on that from me, what do you think is sort of special about Cue? You've obviously gone back there with Caprice after Musgrave.
Mm.
Some of it, is it because it's been overlooked, or is it the endowment? Is it the regolith? Anything? Any comments on that?
Probably a couple of comments, John. The simplest one and the one that you probably don't want to hear is the fact I've got limited brain power and I understand the geology there. No, look, a geologist that understands the geology of a region, you're obviously in a step forward, so you don't have to relearn things. So there's an advantage. Everything is competitive advantage. That's probably a little bit of my competitive advantage. So utilize that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think this might be the last one from Jason Beckton. Rob, well done. Known you since Cal days in the early 90s. One question on geo supply as we approach a time where there are more companies than geos. Why are geology faculties shrinking and commerce law faculties bursting to overfull in Australia?
Jace, you and I have spent a fair bit of time in the bush, so and there's not a lot of people that want to do that anymore. Look, I think, as with always, we need to do probably more education at the lower levels of of age. So we're talking about primary schools. Get in, talk about the excitement of geology, of mining, of being out in the bush, and promote that side of it. I mean, yeah, kids love going fishing. Kids love camping, but once you get to that older age, everything's into, your phone, your contacts and your mates, and there is a link between that bush, camping, fishing, whatever. If we can continue that on at a really younger age, I think you'll find more people wanting to be interested in getting out there in the bush and then doing geology or doing engineering or those more science-based areas.
Yeah. No, look, it's a pretty special career as you've shown. So a lot of really interesting challenges. Hopefully we'll see a resurgence in people coming out of school and going into uni and signing up for geology courses. Touch wood, we certainly need it.